Right, so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us. And this afternoon, I'd like to introduce you to Christine and Brian, who I've known for quite a while now. And they are going to tell us a little bit about their story and how they find themselves in this situation. So over to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, everybody. Well, our nightmare started about January 2014. And up until then, we'd seen our 4 grandchildren nearly every single day and helped out school runs and everything ever since they'd been born. And they only lived around the corner from us. So, as I say, it started January in 2014, and Brian and I were shopping in Bath. And I got this text from our ex-daughter-in-law saying, "Hi, Chris, you've been a fab mother-in-law. Please, can you promise me you'll look after Paul?" So obviously straight away I felt sick. I thought, whatever's going on, what's happened? So I said to Brian, we better go home. So we came straight home, drove round to our son's house. He just lived around the corner from us. No car was there. Our ex-daughter-in-law had obviously gone somewhere. So I thought we better phone our son. So I rang him, and he was actually in Birmingham that day on a course. And I said, you know, we don't want to obviously interfere, but quite concerned as to this text we just had. And was everything fine when you left? He said, well, yeah, as far as I was concerned, everything was fine. So he tried to contact her. In the meantime, he came back and said, apparently she'd gone back to the school after dropping them off earlier and collected them and had driven down to her mother's. She wasn't there very long, maybe the afternoon, and her parents sent her back. And up until then, you know, my son had thought everything was fine. We didn't know why she had done that. So it seemed to settle down after that. And then in March, her behaviour was a bit erratic. And we discovered, our son had said, that there were several things that were happening, like the internet connection to their house kept breaking up. And he didn't have, our son couldn't get access to his bank accounts, and his cards were missing. So he'd been in touch with Nationwide, and they said, well, you know, we'll send you some new ones, but they never arrived. Also at that time, they used to send you like a card reader that you could do your internet banking, and none of those arrived. So he decided in this was March now, I need to sort this out. So he said to his ex-wife, we need to go to Nationwide in Bath to sort this out. She said, oh, I don't feel very well. She was always ill now and then. So she was led on the settee, and he said, well, I'll go. I've got to sort this out. Halfway along Salford and towards Bath, he got a phone call from his ex-wife saying, you're going to have to come back. I've just driven the car into the front of the house.
Oh, gosh.
So under the window, because they have the drive that went by the front window, she'd driven their XC90. She said put her foot on the wrong pedal. Anyway, so obviously he never got to go. So then we're going now to June, and Paul went back to Nationwide because all this time they were giving him compensation because he wasn't receiving these cards. So in June he went with her, and he wanted all their statements printed off, which she didn't want. Anyway, in the end they agreed that they would print them off. She had an account that my son had set up for her, sending her all the money for the bills every month. And he found out that quite a few £1,000s had gone over the last few months from their joint account into her private account. And she couldn't really make an explanation for it, although she did say, well, my mother wants to borrow some money. So now we're going on then, it sort of carried on. They did do a bit of counselling, and we thought everything was fine until October. And it was the 22nd of October 2014, the same year. And I was on my way that morning, Caution, I'm getting ready to go see friends in Salisbury, when I had this phone call from our son's neighbour saying, Chris, your son's house is on fire. Oh, well, I couldn't believe it. I just dropped everything, got in the car and drove around the corner, and it was somebody had rang the fire brigade. I did have a house key, but someone said, "Oh, don't answer, don't do the open the front door because it could." The window had already blown out. It would have exploded. Anyway, we realised that she had left curling tongs resting on her settee, with the wire coming out from the settee in the lounge into the hallway. So she would have had to have stepped over the wire to have gone out the front door. So all this you'll find out how all this happened in a minute and how we came to all this. Anyway, the house was completely, more or less, unlivable, destroyed. The black acrid smoke, the lounge was completely, and this was only in 25 minutes from when she'd left to take the children to school.
What's the cat?
Yeah, the cat died, and they had a puppy. And what was a bit strange was she'd taken that puppy to school with her that morning, which she never did normally. Anyway, she was quite distraught, said, "Oh, I don't know what, Paul's gonna, our son's gonna blame me." And we said, "Don't be so silly." So of course they couldn't live in there, and all the children had were the clothes that they'd gone to school in that day. Our son came home from work, and obviously he was distraught. He just couldn't believe what was happening. So they obviously moved in with us for over a week in our house, which bungalow around the corner. And our son, people were amazing. Neighbours would drop clothes round because literally they'd lost everything. Well, while they were living with us, our son obviously arranged a rental property further down the road through the insurance. So they moved in there the 31st of October. And while we'd been down there helping them move in, that was, I think, on the Friday. On the Saturday, Brian started going through, just by coincidence, our 123 Santander account, which we just kept purely for bills. And he said to me, "Did you withdraw £300 yesterday?" And I said, "Well, no. Why would I do that? We don't use that card for withdrawing money." He said, "Well, £300 is gone out of our account." So with that, he went down to Keynsham and saw the Building Society, and they said, "We'll investigate." So of course he came back and thought, "I'll go back through a few months before." So he went back to September. He said, "Another £375 gone." And I said, "But I can't understand, what date was it?" So you looked, and I said, "But we were on holiday. We were in Turkey." So I went in to see if I could find our card in the bedroom, and it gone missing.
Oh my goodness.
So we rang our son and we said, nearly £700 gone missing, and he straight away said, "I think it's, daughter-in-law, ex-daughter-in-law." Well, I couldn't believe it, because Santander had said it's got to be either a family friend or a member of the family who would do that. And we said, "Well, no, because how would they know?" Yeah,
we don't have friends like that.
We wouldn't have friends or family like it. And how would they know our PIN number? But it was strange, because in the September, when we'd gone to Turkey, we always used to say to our daughter-in-law, well, all the family, if anything should happen to us, all our documents are in this drawer. Well, when we came back, the computer was down.
Yeah.
And she had known, because she was always helping Brian out when he couldn't get round things. And I suppose you shouldn't do it, but we had all our codes and all our...
Yeah.
Obviously, we didn't realise until later what had happened. So we're now... didn't accuse her, because obviously we had no any guarantee, no more guarantee. Proof. So on the Monday, I'd gone down to the Building Society and to the banks, and they said, "Well, it will be on CCTV, but obviously we can't show you. The police are the only ones." So I said, "That's fine, I'm going to report it." So obviously we didn't mention anything to our daughter-in-law, report it to the police. So now we go on, that was the end of October, we now go to bonfire night, November the 5th. So they're all moved into this accommodation just down the road. And Brian had gone to golf, and a lot of people had handed loads of clothes and toys and everything for the children. And I went over to our son's house, because the loss adjuster had turned up, and he said, Paul, our son said, well, take all the stuff down to the house, which I did, and her mother was there. They lived away, and they'd come up for the day, and she said, I don't know what's wrong with her. She said she's at the doctor's with her dad. She's acting really strange. So the doctor had said it was purely, they thought, the shock of the house fire.
Mm.
So our son had come back down and gone down to the doctors and relieved her dad. He came back, and I was there with her mother. And then I suppose, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours later, I got in touch with Brian. I said, you better come down to the house. We'd had a phone call from our son saying, please, can you come back down to Keynsham Park, you know, as fast as you can, and bring her father with you. So I said, well, okay. So we ran down. Couldn't believe it. They're up on the hill. She's covered in mud. And our son is holding on to her, and she's crying and saying, I'm really sorry. It was me that stole your money.
Mm.
So I said, but why? I said, if only you'd asked, if you were in trouble, why did you not ask us? You know, we'd gladly help you out. So then Brian arrived, didn't you? And I went back to the house with my son. They brought her back. She went upstairs, and we hadn't realised until later that day that the playgroup, now our ex-daughter-in-law used to be treasurer of the playgroup, the local playgroup, and basically they tried to get hold of her about 35 times the day before the fire. So it all came out later that we think this was all a distraction, all of it, through the beginning of the year, because obviously she had acquired funds that she shouldn't have.
Oh, God.
Our son had found out that she'd actually paid national insurance to all the aunties, all the ladies that worked at the playgroup.
And the salary.
And their salary out of our son's money.
Oh, my goodness me.
So it was, well, it was just a web of deceit and lies, and we just could not believe what was happening.
No.
So obviously the police are called. We'd never ever had problems with police or social services, ever, have we?
No.
And it just went from there, really, Jane. And then in December, so she was living, our son had said to her parents, you must go down and say with your parent, you need help.
Mm.
She'd also told our son that day that she'd tried to take an overdose, which was why she was acting strangely. Mm. He'd also asked and paid the post office because they're moving house to get all the post delivered. But she was going there and collecting it herself because she was in debt, and all these letters had arrived, debt collecting letters, which she didn't realise. And then obviously, because she'd said that she'd attempted suicide, the doctor wanted her to go to the hospital at the RUH. Mm. So her parents took her there. She wasn't that close to her parents. She always said that we were always closer to her. But on the way back, she said she wanted to see the children, but she got out at the roundabout and ran away. And then you went looking for her, didn't you?
Yeah, this is November the 5th. This is bonfire night.
Yeah, yeah.
My other two sons and myself, we actually went all the way through Keynsham High Street, through the park, all the way around back to the old house that was on fire, trying to look for her. We actually located her not far away from the house that was on with the fire.
Their home.
And we were going to take her home, but my son said, let's phone an ambulance. And at first, the ambulance arrived, no problem. At first, she didn't want to go in the ambulance, but in the end, her dad and me insisted that she went, and they went to the RUH then.
But they brought her back.
But they brought her back after the RUH and assumed everything was okay. But really, she wanted to. What she needed was some consultation and help. Really, that's what she needed. It was a cry for help.
Yeah.
She wouldn't go down with her dad, and that's when it all started. Really, Paul didn't want the children to see her like this, so he stopped it for a couple of days until the police arrived. Again, trying to say what access, and she wanted clothes from the rented accommodation. and wanted to see the children, which Paul didn't mind really. He was quite
just worried about her mental health.
yes, mental health, really. But she obviously didn't appreciate that or acknowledge that. So there was no way of giving her help at all, really, because she didn't want any help. That's the way it went.
And according to her, she hadn't done anything wrong. So we moved in with our son for quite until the January, didn't we?
Yeah.
But so that was November the 5th, and all that happening. And then the beginning of December, on a Saturday morning, I was at the rented house, and there was a knock at the door. It was an officer from the court. She had issued a non-molestation order against Paul for bruising on her wrist from in the park, because he'd held on to her because she was obviously trying to jump into the river. But equally, her father had held on to it as well. And in fact, when they were in the park, a passerby had come over to her father and thought he was abusing her, molesting her. Anyway, it went to court and it was thrown out because there was no proof. But of course, then there was a child protection order, and it went from there. And then Paul was granted 50-50 custody. So where did we go from there?
I've got to say though, Jane, this 50-50 custody really didn't warrant the paper it was said, because if she didn't want them to come back to Paul or see us, or the children, which is more important, if they didn't want to see their dad or us, then she didn't bother. And she was saying that the children don't want to see you, so that was a good excuse for them not to come back to see my son or me or us. Or the family. And she was just using that really as a hammer to crack a walnut, I suppose, really, whatever they call it. So it wasn't that easy really all the way through. And
the other thing you found out, when the playgroup got the police involved as well, basically. And the police were hoping to have got our theft because she'd admitted to it in the park, which she denied later. But her father was there, Brian was there, my son was there, and obviously in front of me. So what the police were trying to do was they were trying to get our theft on the back of the playgroup, because I think that was what she was doing. She'd taken money from the playgroup, trying to got herself in such a situation she couldn't get out of it. So then started stealing money from our son to pay their wages, national insurance, and obviously then in the end she stole from us. And also, while we were going through all the paperwork when all this was happening, Brian found out, because you can go online and see all the playgroups, all the different accounts for different charities, can't you? And they found that she had forged Brian's signature for 3 years on the accounts.
Good Lord.
And also Paul's friend, our son's friend, for 2 years.
Gosh.
It was just a web of things happening over the months. It was just absolutely unbelievable. And the poor children, when she got to see the children, she was obviously then beginning to turn them against us. And we would see them, or if we saw them, they would sort of put their hands up, would look at us. It was horrendous.
You have to say though, Jane, the police could not find evidence enough to take her to court on the playgroup. And I think it was twofold really. The playgroup didn't want any publicity because she was the only signature on the checks, and they were at fault because they should have had 2 signatures. So if it went to the commission, then that would be wrong. So it's embarrassing for the playgroup to take her to court. The police didn't research that much evidence, so all they ended up with was our evidence of 3 occasions taking money from our account.
And I did say to him, will that go to court? It wasn't us that took her to court. And I said, because obviously it was only a couple of hundred. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, we will pursue that. So I think the January after, she wouldn't admit to it. She denied it. So of course it had to go to court for her to stand up and say, are you guilty or not guilty? She said not guilty. So that meant a court appearance in the February of 2016. I think it took a year.
Yeah.
So
this is the magistrates' court now.
yes, the magistrates, but she stood up and she denied it. Her
No.
father stood up and lied and said that he hadn't heard her say that in the park, that she'd stolen our money. Anyway, they convened and they came back after all day, Brian giving evidence, our son giving evidence, and myself giving evidence, which was quite traumatic.
Yeah.
And they came back and they said, definitely she was found guilty, and it was the, what was the word that they used?
Oh, deceit. I can't remember that.
Just mistrust. Oh, I can't think what they said now.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah,
It's fine.
anyway, that she'd deceived us, and it was the ultimate,
Ultimate mistrust.
yeah.
Okay.
And she was found guilty of 3 counts of misrepresentation, fraud on three counts. So that was that. And then, as I say, our son had got 50-50 custody, and gradually things started to settle down a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the girls were coming over every other weekend to stay.
Yeah.
But the two older boys didn't want to. And then things were going a lot better, weren't they?
Yeah,
until June 2018, so just over 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that our second eldest grandson has got issues, and he'd seen our son in the January, and he'd come over to see him on the Father's Day just for an hour, which was nice. And then obviously he was taken back, and then he said to Brian, who said, I'm going to come over and see Dad at the weekend, which would have been middle of June. So he said, oh, that's lovely. So, but just for the one night, because, and with Margaret, with our son, if you'd said one night, it would have to be one night. And it was slowly, because he hadn't been over for months.
Yeah.
Well, believe it or not, surprise, surprise, she didn't turn up on the Saturday for him. And she said, well, I never said I was coming over on the Saturday, but our son has got text, proof.
It's just one night.
That it was just one night. And on the Sunday morning, he just flipped. He went absolutely berserk. He was obviously disappointed and upset that she hadn't come for him, so he was taking it out on our son. So to stop him hurting himself, because he was going absolutely ballistic, our son held him on his wrist to try and help. Of course, he was wriggling, caused a little bruise mark here. You know what I'm going to say? He goes back to her that evening. Next morning, social services are involved. And what should have been just a family incident in many homes that happen all the time, she obviously was waiting for any opportunity to get him back to court. So another non-molestation order. And quite rightly, social services were involved. South Gloss now, because she had moved over a different part of the town. And they have to investigate. And we understood all that, and our son understood all that. But the person that they put in charge, he was biased right from the very beginning. Instead of listening to both stories, because it wasn't just about that one incident, it should have been the history of how and why our grandson had acted like it.
Yeah.
Because that had a traumatic effect. What the grandchildren had gone through in their small little lives over those months was more than a lifetime for many.
Yes.
So you accompanied.
Yeah, I mean, we
put a complaint in.
It took several months to get the complaint and the report from South Gloucester Children's Section. And when we got the report, it was so under-researched and unprofessional, and it was based on what the social worker thought was happening, as opposed to actual factual things, what was actually happening. And when the report came, my son then, we both agreed that we ought to appeal. And we did an appeal on 7 complaints of the report. And it took us probably 6 months to get through. We went through stage 1, 2, and 3, and the final stage, where stage 1 and 2, they agreed 5 of the 7 complaints. But Paul and I thought, or my son and I thought, that we really have to go for the full Monty. So we went back to stage 3 of the complaint procedure, and we actually got, my son actually got all 7 complaints upheld. An apology from South Gloucester, from the chief exec, but that held little, Jane. We just wasted probably 18 months arguing in court on a report that was so unbiased, so unprofessional. And in the end, the chair lady of the committee of the appeal said the final report was lazy social work. But it's no good, is it? It's no good when you don't see your grandchildren for 18 months on no fault of any. It wasn't anybody's fault. It was just one of those things where he actually flipped, and he's very difficult to control. You hold his wrist because he had a computer in his hand at the time. And my son would say he was swinging that around at my son and also at the wall. So he held his wrist to try and stop him swinging. Of course, it bruised. That was the problem.
It also came through that our ex-daughter-in-law had said that the other children had heard it, but they hadn't. They were in the garden with it, and there was no shouting. Our son hadn't shouted at him, but she was obviously escalating it to, you know, for the court. So the non-molestation order was thrown out yet again. But of course, then they had to do the child contact order, carry that through, which is what's been going on now since June 2018. And I've got to say, our son is been back to court and seen 5 different judges. And every time he'll say, have you seen the letter from social services, you know, upholding all my complaints? And half the time they say, well, no, we haven't got that in front of us. And he says, but I've issued that with the court months ago, but I've got another copy. So he's very meticulous. He's got all the paperwork. So we'd hand them another one. And this has gone on all this time. Anyway, a couple of months ago, the court decided that they would grant the children a guardian plus a solicitor. So that's what's happened, and she's trying to get contact going again between the 3 children. Well, we have to say that when that happened 2 years ago, our eldest grandson came back to live with our son, because social services, while they were doing the investigation of that incident, had told our son that he could not take his 2 daughters plus his son on holiday with him. And yet he could take his 2 stepchildren with him.
Okay.
Because he's now with another partner, been with her for 5 years, and she's got 2 children. So our eldest grandson came back to live with him, and he's been with him ever since.
And how old was he at that point?
He is now 18, so he would have been 16.
Okay.
Yeah. So he would have been 16. So it's just been, well, devastating, and it's just not obviously for us, but for the grandchildren, missing out on all the family, and having them to be put through all what she's put them through, and even at the school, getting the school secretary to walk the children across the playground so that our son couldn't, you know, and they're supposed to be neutral, but they weren't. So we wrote a letter to the headmaster complaining and saying, you know, you should be neutral, you shouldn't be doing. She was obviously phoning the school saying that she felt that they were in danger.
Yes.
And it just was obviously, all these years it's been painting a terrible picture of our son.
Yes.
When he's a governor at the school, he loves the children. He just wants to be a dad.
Of course he does.
He just wants to be a dad, and he loves them so much.
Of course he does. How old are the other grandchildren now?
Now, it's funny, our eldest granddaughter is 14 today.
Okay.
Our grandson is 15, and our youngest granddaughter is 10.
Okay.
So a few weeks ago, the guardian, she's been very nice, and she said this should never have happened, it should never, but of course the damage has been done.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And the children are getting older now.
Of course.
And you can't undo all those years of you know, the pain they've been through and what they've been told behind our backs.
Yeah.
We are granted an hour tonight to see our granddaughter, to take the presents across and that. So fingers crossed.
Sometimes we're left on the doorstep, but we don't worry.
Well, we've been doing this
for years,
Jane, for 5 years now. Every Christmas we take the presents over. Every birthday,
never
Easter,
forget them.
We never forget them, and we probably spend 20 minutes on the doorstep, pass the presents in, and then we have to go basically. But tonight, maybe we may stay a little longer. We don't know, but
our son is now seeing our youngest granddaughter, who's 10, and he brought her over here last week. The other two don't want to see him now.
Okay.
The 14 and 15-year-old, the granddaughter and grandson, they don't want to see him. Now it's funny because the guardian wanted to have our grandson, where this incident with what happened, have him in the room with our son and her. So the three of them, a couple of weeks ago, were in our ex-daughter-in-law's house, and she wanted our son to explain to Marcus. He actually asked, our grandson actually asked what happened. So our son looked at the guardian and said, what shall I do? How much shall I tell him? And she said, tell him everything. She said, he's now 15, he's asked you, so tell him.
Absolutely.
So he did. He told, and he's obviously got upset, which I don't think was a bad thing in a way, for our grandson to see him like that. But there was no reaction from him, the grandson. But then it's an awful lot to take in. But deep down, I think they know what's been going on, because although we've never, ever run her down to any of them. We always say, when we used to have them, when our son used to have them, and he'd take the children back after the weekend, they changed as soon as they drove down that road. So our son would get out of the car, she would open the door slightly, they would run in, she wouldn't come out and say, oh, have you had a nice time with your dad? And she would slam the door in our son's face. So what does that do to the children? It's terrible.
It's a huge emotional trauma for the children. And,
awful.
It takes them years, if not a lifetime, to come to terms with something. Every situation of estrangement or alienation is awful for the children, as we know. But if you complicate it like your story is, with all the other stuff that is attached to it as well, of course these children are going to, they don't know how to react. It's, they're thrown into an adult commotion, really, of which they've had no power or control over.
And I think years ago, Jane, I think you said about this Ryan Thomas video. Well, I watched that a long time ago. And it does relate, actually, because I think the only way the grandchildren can cope, they switch off.
Yes, I agree.
Because they're actually living with that alienated or alienator of a parent. So that's the only way they can cope, is by switching off and not showing that they want to see us.
Yes, and I think, I've always said that children actually they are very astute. They know what's going on, they know what's right and what is wrong, but they also know what side their bread's buttered. And so they have to find that safe place that they can be, because they're living a life that possibly we may not have wanted for them, but that's the life they're leading and the cards that they've been dealt. And so they have to live that life, don't they? So they have their own strategies of how to deal with that situation. And it's well known and factually well known that children will love both parents. However badly treated one of those parents might treat these children, even as far as an abuser, the children still love that abuser.
Yeah, that's right. I quite agree with you.
The children, it's an impossible situation that the kids are all in.
Our grandson has actually started going back over there for tea and we think that's good. Because he wasn't, about 2 Christmases ago, the year that he came back to live with our son, so you're talking of 2018 Christmas, he came over with us on the doorstep and she never invited him in.
Okay.
And we were stood there in the rain for about 20 minutes. But then we always used to say to him, have you heard from, you know, you ought to get in touch with your mum, you ought to see your brothers and your sisters. You know, it's important that you have a nice relationship with them. Because we've got 3 sons and we've got 11 grandchildren altogether. And what is so sad is Christmases and the times when you get together, the children always love being together.
Of course they do.
And unfortunately, 3 of them now haven't had that for a few years, and it is so sad that she's deprived them of their right to see everybody.
Yes, of course, and that applies to all of the children who are involved in this sort of situation. That it's their right that has been taken away from them from somebody who is a controlling person generally. And you know, the kids don't have that voice. So you know, obviously what you've told us this afternoon is extraordinary, and just a catalogue of, well, awfulness really. But so I mean, I know, having had a son myself who I had to support through estrangement and alienation, etc., I know myself how that feels. But for you two, how does that manifest itself, you know, with the, you know, you knowing that your son's going through this, and obviously the fact that you're not seeing your grandchildren in the way you would like to. So how does it make you both feel?
Sad, and it's very hard, because you want things to be okay for your children and make things right, and we can't. You're helpless, and very often they've wanted to see us and not him, or come to our house and not his. And we've always rung him up and said, look, are you happy if we see them? And he's always said, well, yes, because some contact's better than none. But it's made him feel terrible, you know. But we've never done it without telling him. And he's always wanted us to, hasn't he?
I think that the real, say, annoying thing, Jane, I suppose, is it could have been easily solved at the start. Don't get me wrong. I mean, everybody's on edge. Divorces going through. Everybody's fighting for money and where it all goes. And the only winners really are the solicitors and the legal people. And if really we all sat down, I say all sat down, my son and his ex sat down and just said, look, any money I spend now is coming out of the main kitty. I mean, the times that my son went to court to fight for 50-50, how much it cost was horrendous. And he kept saying, I cannot go back. You cannot keep going back to court because the money is going down and down and down. And it's going to be a lot less, not only for you, ex-wife, but for the children as well.
Of course.
And really, if somebody could grab it when it starts and then start talking, I mean, everybody got their own egos, haven't they? Everybody wants to do this, and if I get another couple more money, I have more money here and a bit there. It's not beneficial to anyone. And then what's happening is you're actually depriving the children, and you're depriving the children of people that really love them and really, really want to do well for them.
He represents himself. He has done for a long time, all this time, because he can't afford to.
How much money do you think he has spent on going backwards and forwards to court, roughly?
Oh, over 20,000.
I think it's over 20,000. And
easily.
It didn't mean anything in the end, Jane. You had a 50-50 court order. If the kids don't want to see you, and obviously ex doesn't want them to see them either, it's not going to happen. So no matter how much money, Paul still got the 50-50 order. Nobody's ever referred to that. When we go back to court again, they're not interested. It's what's happening now. Which is fine. But when they haven't got the paperwork there, it's a different judge. Every support worker is different every time you go to court.
So you feel as though you're starting again all the time.
All the time.
It's terrible.
And the procedures, really, if you get a court every 6, maybe 8 weeks, you're doing very well.
It's a journey for months and months.
You know, 18 months out of a 10-year-old's life is a big, big chunk.
Of course it is.
It's a big, and this goes on, and you get different people. The
Yeah.
new guardian was only appointed 2 months ago.
Is the other one retired?
The one retired.
Yeah.
You know, the social workers are different every time you deal with somebody. It's somebody different.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to be joined up at all.
There's no consistency.
And no consistency.
The whole system, isn't it? The whole system is not fit for purpose.
It's shocking.
Well, I think in January, the previous guardian had recommended that contact start again, and he said for our son to see the children once a month for 1 hour.
Once a month for now.
So that happened, but then obviously after a month he retired. So this new lady said that's not right. It should be, you know, twice a week. So that's how it's been going. But I think a few weeks ago our son was really down because he was going over there, going for a walk, and he said, I feel I don't know my own children.
Yes.
Doesn't know what they're doing, what they like. Same with us.
Yeah.
So I think about 2 weeks ago, he said to the two older ones, look, I can't, you know, take you in the car kicking and screaming. If you don't want to see me, that's your decision, but I'm always here for you.
Yes. And I think, you know, that there does come that point, doesn't there, where he as a parent and then us as grandparents actually have to say the same thing, really, because particularly as they're getting older, because they are in a position to make that decision for themselves. And actually, in time, they will come round to know that things weren't quite as they thought it was. And so it changes. And we just have to, you know, your son is absolutely right. And we have to say exactly the same thing, that we are here. The door's always open. And, you know, we will always be here for them.
I always message them every couple of, every fortnight, either or FaceTime or, you know, whatever. I very rarely get a response. Sometimes I do, but I don't worry about that.
No.
We just want them to know that we're here.
I agree.
If ever they want us.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. No, I agree with you.
But it's just so raw, because in the beginning, you breathe it, don't you? You wake up in the morning, think about it, you know, last thing at night, and it just eats you up.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Eats you up. And then, as I say, I was ill for a couple of years, so it's just all the stress, I think, and it's just terrible.
Which is why it's so important that grandparents reach a stage where they need to look after themselves as well and keep themselves healthy as far as they can, so that they are fit and healthy for when the grandchildren do come back to them. And you know, in many cases they do, and that's all we can do, and that's the hope for everybody, isn't it, really? I can't thank you two enough. You've been incredibly open, and it's not always easy, I know, to do this sort of thing, but it's so helpful to other people when they hear other grandparents who are going through things. And although obviously the stories are different, clearly, the end result is the same. The end result is that, you know, grandchildren are not seeing their grandparents, and parents aren't seeing their own children.
Everyone's going through the pain, aren't they?
Yes,
but
they
it's all different stories. But
they are. But thank you both so much. It's been brilliant, and I on behalf of everybody who I know will listen to this, thank you so much.
Well, I hope it helps other people, but as I say, you just got to keep the faith, and tomorrow's another day, so things change.
It is. Thank you both very much. Thank you.
Thank you.